The Holy Gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ, according to Matthew, verses 34 to 46. When the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together, and one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question to test him. "Teacher, which commandment in the law is the greatest?" He said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the greatest and first commandment, and the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets." Now while the Pharisees were gathered together, Jesus asked them this question: "What do you think of the Messiah? Whose son is he?" They said to him, "The son of David." He said to them, "How is it then that David, by the Spirit, calls him Lord, saying, 'The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I put your enemies under your feet'? If David thus calls him Lord, how can he be his son?" No one was able to give him an answer, nor from that day did anyone dare to ask him any more questions. The Gospel according to Christ.
Good morning. Last week we had heard in our gospel reading how the Sadducees attempted to silence Jesus and failed. And this week we hear of a group of Jewish leaders wanting to silence Jesus also, named the Pharisees. And like the Sadducees, the Pharisees were quite zealous. They were known to be sincerely devout, holding a scrupulous observance to the law, almost separating themselves from everybody else as they lived out their beliefs. And the Pharisees were in regular conflict with the Sadducees, but the one thing that they were able to join together on was their desire to rid themselves of the problems presented in Jesus. And this is the context behind today's reading, where the Pharisees came to Jesus and posed a very legalistic question, at least legalistic in their minds. What is the greatest commandment? At that time, there were about 613 commandments, some saying what a person should do, and some saying what a person shouldn't do. And they were meant, as I understand it most easiest, to uphold the law of Moses, the 10 Commandments. And if Jesus' answer to the question, what is the greatest commandment, wasn't quite as meticulous as these Pharisees think it should be, they would be able to discredit people in the eyes of the people by discrediting Jesus' theology. Nonetheless, Jesus was able to provide a solid answer. The greatest commandment is to love God, and the second greatest is to love your neighbor. These answers arose out of teachings in Deuteronomy and teachings in Leviticus. And they are an amalgamation of teachings that cut to the heart of deep Jewish tradition and law. By providing this answer, not only did Jesus suppress the Pharisees' sly attempt to undermine him, but he permanently silenced further theological challenges. And not only do we read of Jesus answering well, but today's gospel also contains Jesus silencing further challenges by asking them a question they could not answer. Jesus asked them, "Who is the Messiah?" Following tradition, they said, "The Messiah is the son of David." And Jesus says, "If David by the Spirit calls him Lord, how can the Messiah be his son?" This was an important point for Jesus to be making, because Jewish tradition argued that there would one day come a prince of the line of David who would shatter Israel's enemies. And there was an expectation of greatness fueled by noble blood. And though Jesus was of David's line, his messiahship was not based on noble blood, but on something utterly unexpected: a loving and compassionate soul. Now, for you and I, the question that Jesus asked, and really it doesn't hold a whole lot of weight. It wouldn't matter so much to us. But for these Pharisees, these legalistic minds, it was confounding. Because Jesus' logic shattered their rigorous thought process, leaving them speechless. In both Matthew and Mark's gospel, this moment, this entanglement with the Pharisees, is when the Jewish leaders began to move away from challenging Jesus directly. It was a point where the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the Herodians began to try and sway and control the peoples around Jesus and the government that was in charge. And so this is the context for today's reading. And the point that I would like to draw from it is this: to emulate the life of Jesus, the Spirit calls us out of the deep darkness of struggles for power into relationship forged by the grace of God, powerfully uplifted by the Spirit, and expressed in a loving compassion towards all living things. And this love and this compassion, this is much, much, much more than just a warm, fuzzy feeling. It's much, much more than just casual kindness. I was doing some research and came across a blog by a pastor named Michael Howard. He said of this kind of love, "It is a way of living where we are challenged to reevaluate our lives, our commitments, and our politics, and orient them in ways that honor the divine image in others." That's a big task. This past week, in the news, we've all heard of the shooting in Ottawa. And on Saturday, many people gathered at the National War Memorial to pay respects to Captain Cervilla, who was shot dead by an Islamic extremist. And most of you have heard or seen images of that paramedic went up to that imam during that service and gave him a hug. I heard part of the interview on CBC when I was driving back from somewhere. And he said, the Islamic faith is not represented in the very few. And this imam is my brother. And I thought, wow. Talk about the greatest commandment being uplifted. This was, his reaching out, his hugging was far more than just a warm fuzzy. There was something being said in that moment that touched the entire nation. And if you look on the front page of any newspaper, that's what you saw on Sunday. You look on look on CBC right now on the internet, and that you'll find a video of that very moment. Because it was big in the eyes of people. But not many people really understood what it was about. But it did mean something symbolic. And that, I think, is what represents the greatest commandment, to love God. To love your neighbor, you should love yourself. That moment displayed something. It displayed a love that moves beyond all sentimentality. And it moves beyond all power and all divisions, all hatred, all politics. And it embraces those with whom it comes in touch with. And this love of Jesus, the love represented and called for in the greatest commandment, is a love, it's not meant to empower us. It's meant for us to empower others. And that's what happened on that Saturday at the warming morning. You know, you can actually believe that you despise your neighbor. You can actually feel hatred towards somebody. But this greatest commandment is the kind of biblical love where you can still love somebody as long as you continue to act for the well-being. And because it's not a selfish kind of love, it's not something you do to get something from, often we can feel disenfranchised. A lot of us feel disenfranchised at different moments during our week. And we can, some of us anyway, can feel the depression that comes with that aloneness. Sometimes it's an unchosen place to be. Yet, despite whether comfort is given to you, if you love, as Jesus radically loved and called us to love, you'll reach out to others, despite the need for others to reach out to you. I kind of becoming more and more aware as I become a senior priest in the diocese, and as I become somebody older than 55, that a lot of expectation of people that I come in touch with is that I will help them to feel connected. Where when I was younger, senior priests and people over 55 used to reach out to me to make me feel connected. And I don't know if that rings a bell with anybody here, but the older I get, the more I know that I am being called upon to make others feel welcome and connected. It's almost like moving out of childhood into moving into maturity. So as I was thinking about all that, and I was going through the internet trying to, find some information and look at different commentaries online, I came across one, and I want to share it with you because I think it's very important in light of this greatest commandment. In an age when the word love is greatly abused, I think the reference here is flawed sentimentality. It is important to remember that the primary component of biblical love is not affection, but commitment. Wonderful way to put it. Stubborn, unwavering commitment. And such is this commitment, in my experience, that humility and forgiveness become tools to live by constantly. Humility and forgiveness, in my experience, has become the basis of mature love, biblical love, the love called the greatest commandments. I also am aware that as I try to live this way, that we are becoming, we do become more and more dependent upon a faith that the Holy Spirit surrounds us and protects us and works from within us to not only move out into the world, but to move deeper into our souls. And when that moves into our souls, when that kind of stubborn, unwavering commitment to be loving and compassionate begins to burrow deeper within us, and we attempt to live it out, we attempt to take it in, we find ourselves cleansed. That has been my experience as well. And it's also my experience that peace begins to find root, and that connection and wholeness becomes something more difficult to break, because the roots start to go deeper and deeper and deeper. Let me conclude. You shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart, and with all of your soul, and with all of your mind. With all of your mind. It's a commitment. This is the greatest and first commandment. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets. Every religion, every main religion throughout the world has got at its very core this commandment written in different ways. And I believe it is because it is the will of Spirit that the entirety of her created universe comes under this rule. Despite how we get there, the Spirit wants us to get there. To live in loving harmony with one another and of all creation. And I believe that when we breach the boundaries of the Great Commandment, we breach our connection to God, and we enter into a chaos. And in that chaos, there's what? Grief and a brokenness that can only be repaired through commitment to the love of God. all